Today we're going to look at Jersey's Martello Towers, or as they should more properly be called, Conway's Towers. These are a series of iconic 18th century defensive coastal towers that can be seen around the island's foreshore. Because of Jersey's geographical position, it's only a few miles off the often hostile Normandy coast, and also its political situation, being overseen by a distant and often disinterested authority in London, Jersey has always been vulnerable to attack. Up until the late 18th century, Jersey lay pretty much undefended against Viking raiders, pirates, and latterly the covetous eyes of the French. The island's fortifications only consisted of siege defences, not intended to repel aggressors, but somewhere to shelter until attackers withdrew. Places like the earthworks at Catel de Roselle, Grone Castle, Montorgueil Castle, and latterly Elizabeth Castle. In 1772, Henry Seymour Conway was appointed Governor-General to Jersey. It took him 6 years to actually arrive in the island. However, once he was here, he proved to be a man of action. Appalled by the lack of fortifications, General Conway wrote to the Secretary of State in May of 1778, the same month in which he had arrived, proposing that a series of 30 round towers be erected along Jersey's most vulnerable shoreline. The cost was to be £156 per tower, and amazingly, the funds were approved in just 2 months. General Conway was a student of military history and was copying a French concept that had proved most effective for Louis XV's forces, although the actual design for the towers is uniquely Jersey. The idea was that each tower would act as a small fortress, where a dozen or so troops could hamper invading forces with musket fire from a protected elevated position, delaying the attackers until reinforcements could arrive. The towers had 3 floors as well as a roof, and the door was on the first floor level to impede easy access. Despite the quick response of the British government, it was nearly a year before construction work began, and had only just done so when in May 1779 the French attempted a landing in St. Juan's Bay. These were dangerous times, as Britain was at war with France. However, under the supervision of the newly arrived Captain F.G. Mulcaster in the same year, work began, and the first 4 towers were completed that year, and some 18 more were built in the coming decade. Ironically, when the French did land at La Roque on January 6, 1781, it was close to where one of the new towers had just been built, but the troops stationed there failed to notice the hundreds of French soldiers landing before they marched to town and demand the island surrender. And in case you didn't know, Jersey didn't surrender. The Battle of Jersey was fought in the Royal Square and the French were routed, which was the last landing of foreign troops in the island until the German occupation nearly 160 years later. How effective these defences would have been against invading forces was never put to the test, and not a single shot was fired in anger from the towers. 40 years later, following the advancement in technology, a new set of towers would be built to take bigger guns, and whereas Conway's towers were intended to defend against invading troops on land, the new strategy was to destroy the enemy ships before the soldiers could even get ashore. Much has changed in the last 240 years, and the fate of each tower has varied hugely. At the time of their construction, Jersey's sea walls had yet to be built, and the island's coastline was mostly shingle and dune. Of the 5 Conway towers built in St. Juan's Bay, 3 fell prey to coastal erosion, 1 was destroyed by German occupying forces, and only La Roque Tower now remains, although it too was badly damaged during the German occupation and was repaired in the 1960s. It is now used as a summer let for adventurous holidaymakers, and incidentally, the tower's official name is Gordon's Tower, after Lieutenant General Andrew Gordon, but absolutely nobody calls it that. Being so close to the sea, a number of the towers have been painted as navigational aids to seafarers. Greve de Lek, the only tower on the north coast, was repurposed by the occupying forces and now sits somewhat forlornly in a public car park. Perhaps the saddest tower is the Flique Tower, also known as the Telegraph Tower, as it used to be the site where the telegraph cable came ashore. At some time in the 1800s, the top story was removed, and the Germans did further alterations during the occupation. Today it looks like a neglected and maltreated old friend, the only saving grace being that it is so tucked away in this small isolated bay that few people ever see how it's been mistreated. Just around the coast at St. Catherine's Bay, a tower can be found with its seaward side painted white. It sits almost on the sea wall between the car park and the lifeboat station, and although a little neglected, remains mostly unchanged. The tower at Hirondelle is just across the bay and is painted in bright red and white. It has a gun platform at its base and is alongside the start of a long abandoned breakwater. It is administered by Jersey Heritage and is available to let as holiday accommodation. From La Roque there are 6 towers at intervals only a few hundred metres apart. All are in private hands and some have been incorporated into homes. The tower at La Roque was for many years the home of an amateur radio club before coming under the administration of Jersey Heritage. Although not generally open to the public, it is accessible on occasional open days. There were 3 towers in St. Oban's Bay, unimaginatively named First, Second and Third Tower, and none of them has gone up in the world. The first tower has given its name to the surrounding area. After its military career was over, it was repurposed as the base of a water tank, the attached wind pump drawing water up before distributing it to nearby properties. Later, it was incorporated into the main pumping station of the island's sewage works. The third tower is sited at Beaumont, by the Gunsite Cafe. It too is the site of a sewage pumping station. But both the first and the third towers have done better than the second tower, which stood at Belroyal just behind where the hamburger stall now stands. It was blown up in 1943 by German forces to make way for the bunkers that they were building in the area. Waynay has endured less development than many of Jersey's coastal areas, which is why Waynay's tower stands much as it must have done for the last 2 centuries in glorious isolation. Other than its coat of red and white paint, this tower remains largely untouched, and the land around it is now a protected wetland area. And finally we come to the tower in St. Brelard's Bay. Like many of the towers, it is now in private ownership and has recently been refurbished as a holiday let. A bay window was fitted some years ago, which gives this quirky 1-bedroom accommodation one of the best views in the island. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our quick trip around Jersey's Conway Towers. I'm Richard, and this has been brought to you by Jersey, a Guide.